Welcome to Storifide. This week we'll be talking about 3 haunted dolls that exist in real life. So let's get started. First, let's talk about Mandy. Now Mandy is an antique porcelain style doll currently housed in the Quesnel Museum in Quesnel, British Columbia, Canada. Her previous owner said at night she would supposedly hear the sound of a baby crying in the basement. It's where she thought the sound was coming from. But when investigating the noise, she would find nothing but an open window and curtains flowing back and forth. Did the window open by itself? Or was it Mandy that opened it maybe? Mandy was donated to the Quesnel Museum back in 1991, and the previous owner never heard the crying again once the doll was gone. But this is where the story really starts. At the museum, objects would go missing. Sometimes they would be found elsewhere, sometimes they were just gone. Staff lunches would go missing, but would usually be found later on in drawers. Visitors say they have observed the doll's eyes moving and sometimes her head moving. And it's been said that some who've tried to take pictures of her couldn't do so because their batteries would suddenly lose power or the lights on their cameras would flash on and off. Mandy was eventually placed in a display case, and some say she's tapped on her glass enclosure. There's also a little toy lamb that was placed inside the case with Mandy, and it supposedly appeared outside of the case one morning, as if Mandy didn't want it in there with her. If you want to go and visit Mandy, she's still housed in her case in the museum. You can visit their website for more information. I'll put a link in the description below. And now, on to another doll that you may or may not have heard of. This one is called Robert the Doll. The doll was gifted to a young boy named Robert Eugene Otto in the early 1900s. The young boy wasn't called Robert though, everyone called him Gene. Gene decided to name the doll after himself and call it Robert. Gene was very close to his doll and carried it with him wherever he went. He would also make conversation with the doll. Whenever things happened around the house, when asked, Gene would say, "Robert did it." The boy's parents would wake up sometimes to Gene screaming, and would find furniture overturned, and Gene would say, "Robert did it." Toys were also found mutilated, and again, "Robert did it" would be the response by Gene. The term "Robert did it" would be used quite often in the household, as Gene would begin to blame any mishap on Robert. The Ottos, of course, were not convinced it was Robert. However, adults also started noticing odd occurrences, especially as Gene and Robert grew older. Some have said they could see Robert walking from one window to the other, and the Ottos say they could hear Robert laughing and walking around. Robert was moved to the attic where he stayed for a number of years. Years later, Gene would return to his childhood home, known as the Artist House, after his parents passed along with Robert. Gene would spend his days painting with his old friend. Now it's also been said that Gene's wife didn't like Robert and allegedly wanted Robert locked in the attic. School children would swear that they could see Robert appear, disappear, and reappear in the attic window, and they would avoid the house altogether. A lady named Myrtle purchased the artist's house after Gene passed away in 1974. A few years later, she heard noises in the attic and decided to check it out, and that's when she found Robert in his chair, and she became Robert's new caretaker. She has said that Robert would move around the house on his own, and after 20 years of his antics, she finally donated him to the museum. After being donated to the museum, cameras and other electronics would malfunction, and it's said that it's common for visitors to feel something touch their knee, and for orbs to be caught on camera where Robert is kept. After visiting Robert, some guests have wrote letters to Robert asking him for forgiveness and for him to leave them alone. Now something you should always do is ask Robert for permission before you take a picture of him. Those who have laughed and scoffed at this in the past, they also end up writing Robert asking him for forgiveness for not asking permission. In fact, Robert receives at least 3 letters per day, mostly containing apologies and asking forgiveness from Robert and explaining how bad their lives have been since visiting Robert. Now, with that being said, Robert also receives gifts and praises. Robert's origins were traced back to the Stive Company. And another odd fact is, Stive Company thinks he started out life as part of a set of dolls fabricated for a window display of clowns or jesters, and was most likely never meant to be sold. Robert currently sits in his display case at the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. The museum is on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. You can learn more about Robert the Doll and how and when to go visit him at the fort on their website. I'll leave a link in the description below. And now, let's explore doll number 3, a doll that I'm sure you've all heard of. And while all 3 of these dolls we've been talking about today have had movies made about them, or at least loosely based on them, the next one probably is the most well known. Yep, you guessed it. We are talking about Annabelle. Annabelle was a 1970s style Raggedy Ann doll that was gifted to a young nurse for her birthday from her mother. She would begin to notice the doll would randomly change positions. She and her roommate would also find parchment with the words "help me" or "help us" on them, yet there was no parchment paper ever in the apartment. The doll was also found with a red substance similar to blood coming out of it, and would appear in different rooms on its own. A male friend of theirs was once there taking a nap, and when he awoke, the doll was there staring at him. He felt like he was being strangled, and he had deep scratch wounds on his upper body. Ruling out any intruders messing around with him, a medium was brought in, and it was determined there was the spirit of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins inside the doll, possessing. But that expert opinion turned out to not be so cut and dry, as they would soon learn it was actually a demon posing as a little girl that had possessed the doll, and the demon was out to steal someone's soul. Lorraine and Ed Warren were the experts who determined it was a demon. They thought the best course would be to have an exorcism of the apartment performed by Father Cook, and then take the doll with them. So they did, and the ride was so bad, having nearly crashed several times due to brake issues. At some point, Ed sprinkled holy water on the doll to calm it down, and then the issues with the brakes disappeared. They took the doll home and first reported that the doll would levitate and turn up in random places on its own. Eventually, they would have a case built for it and inscribed the Lord's Prayer and St. Michael's Prayer on it. Over the years, while the doll hasn't moved from its case, its spirit has said to have made it into the world, with countless accidents being attributed to the doll. One such claim was of a visitor who knocked on the glass and laughed that people would believe in such nonsense. He was on his way home afterwards and lost control of his motorcycle, and he died instantly. His girlfriend narrowly survived. And this is just one of the many tales that were allegedly caused by the doll after being locked in its case. According to the Warrens, the doll is responsible for 2 near-death experiences, the one fatal accident, and a string of demonic activities that lasted some 30 years. Though Ed and Lorraine have both died, their daughter and son-in-law continued to carry on their legacy. The Annabelle doll has spent its time in the Warrens Occult Museum, but the museum was closed due to zoning issues at the time of this video. However, the doll will be on display at a Connecticut casino this fall. The Annabelle doll can be seen at the Warrens Seekers of the Supernatural Paracon at Mohegan Sun on October 29th of 2022. It must be noted also that according to Ed and Lorraine, the movie The Conjuring, which was based on the Warrens' real life, Ed and Lorraine had input in The Conjuring. The Annabelle movie, however, which was a prequel to The Conjuring, was a more fabricated story. But not just the story, the style of the doll also in the movie was more of a porcelain style, while the real one was not. Lorraine and Ed claim to have investigated over 10,000 cases during their career. Aside from Annabelle, the Warrens were among the first investigators in the Amityville haunting, along with many others. Now, I don't know about you, but I found these stories to be a little creepy. Would you go visit any of these dolls? Drop a comment down below if you plan on checking out any of these for yourself. And also, if you have seen any of these in person, let us know how it went. If you like this type of content, please hit the like button. And if you're new here, we would love for you to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you can be notified when we upload new content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.